Hello and welcome to the Anomaly Project, the show that looks at all aspects of the paranormal and anomalous world. I'm Marcus Lowth, and joining me as does every week is Steve Mera. Now, Steve, we're going to take another
Hmm.
walk into the cryptid world, the Bigfoot world, I think, again tonight. How you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing okay. I'm doing okay, and I love the subject of the cryptids. Of course, we don't get the pleasure of talking about cryptids so much in the UK, though we do have them. But most of the information is coming out from the US and other countries, which is very fascinating about some of the things. And of course, if there is UFOs thrown in there as well, well, that's just makes it for me,
Yeah,
of course, because these are my two favorite subjects, of course.
absolutely, absolutely. Second that. So, our guest this evening is researcher, presenter, and author Heather Moser. Heather, thank you ever so much for joining us. First of all, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's absolute pleasure, absolute pleasure. I think the best place to start with this, I guess, is why cryptids, Heather? What about cryptids and Bigfoot and those type of things? What dragged you in and made you want to really research this kind of thing?
Well, I think the initial spark for all of it was whenever I was a little girl and Unsolved Mysteries was on TV with Robert Stack.
Yes.
And he just, it was like a morbid curiosity in a way. Like it terrified me, but I couldn't not watch the show every day. So, or every week rather. So that started there, but also where I grew up, a very small community. Um, Even as early as elementary school, people were talking about having experiences with Sasquatch. The people that did talk about that, it wasn't received very well. Of course, elementary kids can be pretty rude. But I do remember hearing that, and also the community is not far from where the Minerva monster happened, which is one of the more famous stories in the US and from the 1970s. And I don't know, I just grew up with this. It was almost like he exists and it wasn't a question, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So it was something that was just always kind of interesting to me between the paranormal stuff, hearing that from Unsolved Mysteries to growing up with a without much of a question that Bigfoot was around, especially in this area. Um, and that just stuck with me. And it never really occurred to me that it would be something that I could actively like go out in the field and search for until Finding Bigfoot came around. When Finding
Yes.
Bigfoot came on TV, that kind of opened it up to, okay, so there are, there are other people around here that are actively going out in the field. And I started to pay more attention to things. I went to a taping for one of the episodes that was nearby. And that's where I had met Shannon LeGros before Into the Fray was a thing.
Mm.
And we got to talking. And then shortly after that, Seth Breedlove came out with the Minerva Monster documentary, which got my attention because it's from home.
Hmm.
And then we started talking, and it's just gone way off the rails since then, as far as looking into cryptids have gone. But it's just something that, long story short, something that's always been there. I think part of the culture of the area where I live.
Mm.
I mean, Steve, like you mentioned at the beginning there, didn't you? We do get sightings in the United Kingdom, but it does seem to be more of the psyche in America. So, I mean,
Really is a big difference. Yeah. I mean, though that we do have incidents in the UK, which is surprising because we're a very small country and we do have some forest land and some hills and things, but not a great vast distance for these things to be hiding out there. And of course, anybody who's an animal tracker will say, well, if you're tracking an animal, you track its food source. Big, large animals like that are usually going to require quite a good diet. They're going to have to eat quite a bit. And of course, we have to question, well, what food source are they eating? Now, I can understand in the US, these vast areas, but we've got a little bit of a problem now. And this, what Heather, you must have come across this, that we have a little bit of divide. In the early days, it was just Bigfoot is a hyper elusive creature, and it's out there. Is it living underground? And did he bury their own and all that sort of thing? It makes it more hyper elusive to the point where we have this divide now where people are saying, well, we do believe there's some evidence to support that this creature is not just like any other creature. It might be have metaphysical properties, or might be able to cloak itself, or it's got paranormal tendencies. What do you think about that, Heather? I mean, you must have come across that side of things now, making a push forward.
Yeah, it's absolutely something that comes up actually very often. And being in the
Hmm.
cryptid community, you definitely see that divide. It's pretty stark in some aspects where it is the flesh and blood versus what they use as they say woo in some
Yes.
sort of derogatory way.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's something that I've seen a divide amongst researchers. I've seen a divide amongst witnesses as well. And that's where I get really hung up on things because when you're, especially in what we do, creating documentaries, it's based on witness reports. We can't do what we do without their stories. And when witnesses are describing something that I know it's difficult to understand because realistically it shouldn't exist, right?
Yeah.
We're told these things cannot possibly be a part of our world, but then they're seeing these large creatures. And aside from that, some of them are having extra ordinary experiences that go along with it, whether it's something
Mm.
where they see the creature and then it literally disappears or fades into a mist in front of them. Um, and then, of course, one of the big arguments that people bring up are when you find a trackway and then the
Yes.
trackway just disappears all of a sudden. Well, what did they do? They didn't walk
Yeah.
backwards back out. So did they step through a portal or something? Um, but I've also heard people that are on the flesh and blood side say, well, the tracks stop because at that point they drop down on all fours and kind of do a crawl, and so the tracks look differently.
Mm.
Um, so
It's a
I don't
tough
know.
one, isn't it?
I've definitely seen it. I wish that, and this goes for any of the cryptid community, dogman community, any of them,
Mm.
paranormal, UFOs, all of that. I wish that we weren't so dismissive of the others and were more open to taking in bits and pieces to
Yeah.
try to make this puzzle make sense. Because I don't think that we're going to find the answers
Mm.
being so staunch in our beliefs that we know what this unknown creature is and how
Yes.
it exists and so on. So, um, yeah,
Yeah,
that's my opinion though.
I totally get that. I mean, there's some, oh, it's actually quite a number of witnesses now. When we talk about cryptids, there are so many different varied, from your owlman to mothman and lizardman and all sorts of
Yeah.
things. It isn't just obviously the Sasquatch or Bigfoot, but
Hmm.
you get this aspect where they say sometimes, not all the time, that they have internally lit glowing eyes.
Yeah.
Now, anybody will tell you in the scientific world, a predator will be that'll be the last thing a predator would want is to be able, you can
Right.
see me at night no matter where I am. It'll be such a disadvantageous thing to have.
Yeah.
It would really impact survival
Mhm.
society of these creatures. And that's that spooky area again, that woo area, isn't it? As like, well, are
Yeah.
we dealing with two things here? Are we dealing with that there is a living, breathing flesh creature, but is there something else that kind of mimics these things?
Right.
And this is the big problem because sometimes we just like to throw it all in one pot. But really, when we analyze it, maybe there are some variations in some of these things.
Yeah, it could
Hmm.
be. I mean, Heather, can
Absolutely.
I just jump in because yeah, I just want
Yeah.
to go off the back of what you were just saying. You were saying about how you shouldn't feel you need to take one side or the other or be dismissive over one side or
Yeah.
the other. What are your thoughts on, realistically, we're looking at a flesh and blood creature that also has properties to actually disappear. So we're looking at kind of a bit of both here, because people who have had close up encounters, they'll say they look into these creatures' eyes and they can see intelligence, they can see, like a living form, flesh and blood. But as you say,
Mm.
these things will disappear right in front of people's eyes. So are they using portals? Do they have some kind of cloaking ability? What are your thoughts on it? Do you have a foot in both camps, or do you fall on one side or the other?
So that's a very difficult question for me to answer because I have been out in the field, but I haven't been out in the field like some of my colleagues to the point like Alexander Petikoff's always out. So obviously someone who's out in the woods constantly, their opinion to me holds a great deal of weight when they've had interactions with these things.
Yeah.
Um, so a lot of the people that are out there, a good deal, seem to be in the flesh and blood camp. But again, I fall back on the witnesses' stories. I fall back on some of my own things that have happened on my property that are very odd. I mean, there's physical characteristics to it too, but then there's also just some odd things. And yeah, I don't know. I am pretty at the moment smitten with the idea that Steve kind of touched upon earlier, that maybe we're dealing with two things. And this leads me into thinking more about something that has a trickster type element to it, in that it will mimic whatever it needs to mimic to create a response. And it just so happens that sometimes that is a Sasquatch type creature.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, that I really like that idea. I don't know why. It's just, to me, that's the one that really makes the most sense.
Yeah.
And
I
maybe
mean,
it doesn't to someone who's not open to that kind of thing, but
me and
Yeah,
Steve
I
were
don't
okay.
talking about this
know.
actually a couple of weeks ago, and I was saying it's pretty much the same thing. That you've actually got Bigfoot, who does exist as a flesh and blood creature, and then you've got this
Mhm.
intelligence that is a trickster that is actually mimicking that, which is working in and around that. So I mean, we were talking
It
about
is.
this, Steve.
Yeah.
It's interesting
It
stuff.
really is. I mean, okay, all right. You talk about the Dogman, it's like a bit like a werewolf. I mean, all those stories and tales of these things. But how many times do we actually look through old myths, legends, and folklore and stuff, and we actually start to find there's actually a little bit more to it than just a story? How that happens all over the world. I mean, if you just talk about the fairies and the fae and things of Ireland, it
Mhm.
was, I think the last small village in Ireland that stopped having a curfew is 1976. Can you believe that? That is crazy. I mean, in 1976, they were still thinking we can't go out past, say, 9 or 10 o'clock at night because the Fae come out and we lock ourselves in. I mean, you can't imagine that, can you really? But
Wow.
this is, it's so entwined with rigid belief
Mhm.
that some of these things, there's definitely stuff going on. And I've witnessed some of these strange things in Ireland, and I just thought, it was a learning curve for me because I'm thinking it's just legends and myths. So actually, there is actually something going on. So I think it's a footprint of that across the whole board when you go back through history and you sort of say dog-headed people that once
Mhm.
existed, and there's a good bit of history about that, and trading with Bigfoot, Native Americans. I mean, it's written in sort of really old diaries when explorers came to America. And you think to yourself, well, this thing is not new. It's not something new. But if we are dealing with two different things, it would certainly lend hand to the fact that no animal is going to evolve to have, if it's a predator, which most of them are active at night, to be honest, none of them are going to evolve to have self-illuminating eyes. It's just an absolute nightmare. It's just not, it goes against the grain of evolutionary path of any animal, any predator, to be honest with you. Interestingly about the dogman and stuff, it seems to be more about, I want to put the fear of God in you rather than the actual physically attack. I
Mhm.
mean, there's so many stories where, they could have come crashing straight through a cabin wall or the window or the door. But no, it's got hold of the handle and it's shaking it like, as if to tease the kids inside the house, and they're absolutely petrified, the people inside. So you get this feeling that with Dogman, there's definitely something about the fear factor that's involved. I want to generate fear. And the only thing I've ever found which similar aspects of wanting to generate fear is poltergeist phenomena. So maybe are we dealing with something a bit more paranormal in that nature for these things? But on the other camp, there might be an elusive creature. I mean, when they first found the first panda, they knew, oh, flipping out, what is this strange creature? Do you know how long it took to find the second one? 60 years. It took 60
Mhm.
years to find the second panda because they just couldn't, where they are living, it's just a terrible place for us to get into. Because, I mean,
Mhm.
it's easy. I mean, it's black and white, lives in a forest of green. It moves very slowly. It eats
Right.
pretty much the same thing. You'd think we'd found them in abundance, but it still took 60 years because it's not like it's hyperlusive, it's because of the environments. And I think sometimes the people get a bit mixed up that there is terrain out there in the US Well, I have to honestly say, man has probably never stepped foot. There has to be because it's so vast. And you think to yourself, yeah, you could go and live up there and never be seen again. And if you can do it, animals can do it for sure. So maybe I'm kind of leaning in Heather's direction that we might be dealing with something that's two different things here.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just touching on legends and folklore, Heather, because I know you deal a lot in that and local legends. I mean, it's interesting you mentioned the Fae there, Steve, because I know in Iceland, for example, they still won't build roads where the
Right.
little people live, and they'll purposely build tunnels for them, and they'll leave them gifts. So this kind of thing's probably found quite a way around the world. What are your thoughts, Heather, on legends and myths having partial truths to them? Certainly in relation to, say, modern paranormal activity and creatures and things of that nature.
Well, I think it's definitely it's fact that that kind of thing, any type of story has an element of truth to it, as far as I'm concerned. Before getting into this cryptid world professionally, so to speak, my background was in classical studies, so Roman and Greek myth and culture. And obviously, part of that is
Mhm.
studying the pantheon and mythology from thousands of years ago.
Lots of them,
And
chimeras and all sorts. Yeah.
the myths all start from some grain of truth and a point of wishing to understand what's happening around them.
Mm.
They may not have had it right, that there was not necessarily a god in a chariot dragging the sun, but they were trying to make things make sense to them. And in a world where they didn't have electricity, they didn't have a lot of light, you hear something go bump in the night, you want to know what's going on, so you come up with these stories, but you also want to warn your kids, hey, don't go out there. We
Yeah.
don't know what it is. We're not exactly prepared for that. So I think that that's something that, and I know that the Greeks and the Romans are not the oldest people in the world by any means,
Mm.
but I think it's a good example of how over time that hasn't changed about us, as far as wanting to have stories that help us make sense of the world around us when we can't make sense of it on our own. And
Yes.
I think that that has continued through modern times. Even when it comes to something like when the Europeans first come over to America and we have people settling, like where I'm in the foothills of Appalachia. You're in isolated little areas. You want to keep your family safe. You're bringing some beliefs from your homeland with you, but you're in a new area. And so as things come around and start to spook you, or it doesn't even have to be something spooky. It could be something like learning when to plant and when to harvest and things like that. All of these have stories that go along with them that may seem fantastical and maybe not scientifically accurate in one way or another, but there's something to them. There's something that got us through to this point.
Yeah.
There was some element of truth to it, and I think that that rings true through modern day as well.
It's funny you mentioned the modern day thing. Can I just ask you about this then? Because it just pops into my mind. It's slightly off subject, but a lot of people are pointing to the Slender Man legends, where there's a clear origin for that. We know where he came from. We know he
Yeah.
doesn't exist. We all know how it started.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I
Hmm.
mean, I remember writing an article about how when does legend become fact, and it was brutal. But when they had the Slender Man attempted murders, basically, for those
Mhm.
people
Hmm.
involved in that, that was very, very real, even though Slender Man didn't exist. So do you think it's a good way of looking at how expression, even from the youth of fearing strangers, essentially. We kind of saw that
Hmm.
with the Slender Man legend there, even though we know that there's no absolute
Mm.
truth in it. What are your thoughts on that, Heather?
So the the Slender Man legend is actually it's one that I personally cannot stand
Right.
because
Okay.
of what ultimately has happened
Yeah.
with
Mhm.
these girls taking it
Yeah.
to an extreme where they
Yeah.
attempted some very horrible, not attempted, they did
Oh yeah.
horrible,
Yeah.
horrible
Yeah. Yeah.
things in the name of Slender Man. But and this is also one where, like, I have young children. They hear
Right.
about creepypastas and things like that. And it's like the only one that I'm like, just so you know, Slender Man isn't real. Just
Yeah.
throwing that in there. You can believe other things, but I don't know about him. Um, However, I think, especially if we're going to allow a discussion of something like a trickster into the conversation, that even creating these things, whether we create them in our minds, throw them out on the internet, and then there are enough people talking about it, having belief in it,
Yes.
then why would it something like a trickster eventually pick up on that and manifest that because that's something that elicits fear in one
Kind of
way or
what I was
another.
saying in that article, actually. Yeah. So,
Yeah, yeah. I definitely think that that's a possibility. Another one that's come about fairly recently that people seem to be talking about as if it's always been around. Two of them that can come to mind is this idea of the rake, which
Yes.
that particular creature would not have been characterized as the rake prior to like two
Mm.
years ago or whatever. But it's a thing now. Everybody sees it everywhere. Like so, it's like blown up. That and then in this particular region, the idea of the not deer. People claiming that the not deer just always existed when it didn't, prior
Mm.
to like TikTok making it a thing.
Yeah.
Um, but that doesn't mean that there aren't things out there that are weird, that a trickster thing isn't coming up with these things to mimic what has become pop culture to us in one way.
yeah, yeah,
Um, and that's not
Mm.
even touching upon the idea of a tulpa, where the
Of
thought
course.
form can become
Yeah.
a physical manifestation because there's enough thought behind it. And
Mm.
I don't know where any of this falls. It's just a
Well,
lot of
yeah.
things that make sense to me as we go along. And I've studied, of course, the ancient religions and so on, uh, going up through today. And I think there's definitely something that we can even see today as far as how people react when belief is very strong in something.
yeah,
It becomes true. It becomes real. I've seen it in, even when I study letters that accompany cursed objects when they're returned back
right.
to the
Yeah.
location they were taken from. Recently, I saw those labeled as conscience letters, and I like the way
Yeah.
that I like the ring of that,
Yeah.
conscience letters. But essentially, these places don't necessarily have any curse, so to speak, associated with them. But because we've made these stories
Hmm.
that if you remove a rock from this place, if you take a piece of wood from the petrified forest, you're going to be cursed. Then when people do that and they leave and bad luck follows them,
Yeah.
then their brain tries to rationalize, okay, it can't possibly be my fault or it can't be random.
Mm.
So, what is different? And what's
Yeah.
different is I took something from a cursed location. Therefore, that's it. I have to send it back.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know. I think there's a lot of power in our belief as humans, just from one person to another, what you can see before you and believe to be real. But then when you magnify that
Mm,
by untold numbers, it can get scary at times. And
Yeah.
I think that that's something that's happened, um, with things like Slender Man.
yeah,
Um, whatever was going on with those girls, Slender Man is what stuck out to them. So
yeah,
that's what they clung to. It could have been
mm,
anything else,
yeah,
but
yeah,
in this
yeah.
instance, it was Slender Man that got their attention, and then that's what they went off of.
I
And I'm
think
sure that
I
that
think
happens with other things.
there's some good evidence to support the sort of idea of tulpas or
Yeah.
birthing some form of intelligence. There was, of course, the Philip experiment that took place in Ontario, and they were very successful in regarding, having some interaction with an intelligence, which was completely made up by
Hmm.
the team. There is also evidence to support that you can make a building haunted. I
Yeah.
mean, if you take enough people in there and you fill them with prime knowledge expectation and stories of, yes, this is really haunted over a period of time, you'll start to have strange things happen there. And you think to yourself, okay, so we are directly through our consciousness and belief bringing something forth in those environments. And I can understand now with the power of the internet, and so many
Hmm.
people probably wanting to believe in such things through interest is that we might be giving birth to something. And if that's the case, then that would give an aspect to the paranormal side of some of this phenomena, really, wouldn't it? Because it's to be
Hmm.
expected, it's going to act something like, what we might experience in paranormal phenomena, as opposed to, just like a living creature, which because some of these Bigfoot creatures, some of them are clearly shown that they've had problems. That they've had injuries and they've got a crippled foot and they leave that mark, and you can see that the right foot is seriously damaged. something paranormal. You won't think like you think that's a very living creature trait.
Mm-hmm.
So there's really good evidence in both camps here. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that's what's confusing a lot of
Yeah.
people because they're thinking it's all in one pot and they've got to make some type of decision. When in fact, it is easy to just say, put that on that side and put that on that side because sometimes we might be dealing with both in the same location, strangely enough, as well.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
just to speak about connections, I think here's a good point to bring up UFOs. I mean, where do you think they fit into all this? I mean, because I've heard a lot of theories on this that Bigfoot are
Mm.
connected to these UFOs directly. Well, me and Steve spoke to Trey Hudson a few weeks ago, and he told a remarkable story that he was,
Mm.
witnessing Bigfoot almost being rewarded for solving like puzzles by these alien entities. So, do you think we're dealing with direct connections, or is he dealing with two different creatures that use maybe the same mechanism to enter our world? What are your thoughts? What are your experiences on this kind of?
So when it comes to UFOs and Bigfoot, as far as the connections that I've seen through my research, the first thing that comes to my mind were a string of sightings that happened in the 70s that Stan Gordon recorded when researching the Chestnut Ridge area of
That's not
Pennsylvania.
Ridge. Yeah.
And in those moments, there wasn't necessarily a clear connection between the UFO and the Bigfoot so much as one was seen and the other was seen. It wasn't like a UFO was exiting from a craft or a
Mm.
Bigfoot was exiting from the craft or entering the craft or anything like that. In those moments, thinking of stories like that, um, rather than tying the two together, I've wondered if, if we're dealing with a physical creature, because I would assume maybe a paranormal one doesn't really care about
Yeah.
aliens or whatever. But if
Mm.
we're dealing with a physical creature, why wouldn't they be curious like us in that they see something, so they're going to walk to the edge of the woods and therefore be more visible because they're like, what is that? That doesn't make any
Mm.
sense.
Mm.
And therefore, during high strangeness moments, you're going to see multiple things at the same time if this is a physical creature. Um, I've also heard the theory that Sasquatch is an alien type being that has been dropped off, sent here, whatever, to kind of scout things out, so to speak. Um, I don't know about that. I haven't put much thought into that myself. And that's mainly because when it comes to the idea of aliens, um, it creeps me out in general.
Right,
And I don't want to be creeped out by Bigfoot.
right, okay, fair play.
So I don't want to think that Bigfoot is an alien creature because that in itself would indicate that we're dealing with something far more intelligent than us because we can't even get off of this planet and go somewhere else, yeah,
Yeah.
and stay. So if we're dealing with a creature that can actually leave their home planet, which we know would be nowhere near us from
Yeah,
our limited scientific knowledge, um, and they're here and they're watching us like that really freaks me
I
out.
know it is a bit of a long shot, I admit, and I think when I've looked into this, when people have reported alien abduction type experiences or contact experiences and claim to have seen a large hairy creature like a Bigfoot in
Mhm.
association to the incident, is the fact that I think we gathered enough evidence to show that whatever these intelligences are, they have the capability of manipulating our perception. And this is why we get
Right.
so thousands, not just four. People. I already read something recently. Though. Oh yes, there's four different types of aliens. There's the greys. There's the space brother aliens, and I think
Hmm.
to myself, no, there's thousands of variations, all from all over the world. You go to Brazil, whole different ball game. You go to a different country, it's a different thing. So it's like the perception of these things vastly change. We have incidents where people have said, I saw a giant rabbit. It was never a giant rabbit, it was something else. So quite clearly they can mess about with what we perceive. When I started looking into those cases where people said, I saw kind of a Bigfoot creature, it was interesting to note that they actually live in these rural locations, many of the places are literally where the legend of Bigfoot and Sasquatch and things like that are quite prominent. And I thought to myself, well, if that's in your mindset, maybe they're just utilizing something like you might consider it to be, and you form it. And that's what all this has been based on, that Bigfoot and UFOs are one and the same thing. I don't think they are, But I do think that people can see these things during a type of contact case because I think your perceptions can be really altered. Because in other
Mhm.
countries, they don't see that. They see something different. Same incident, but so you might see something completely different. If you live out in the forest lands or something, you might see a Wendigo and you think, well, what the hell is this? But you might see strange lights and stuff, and you're thinking to yourself, something don't quite add up. Does that mean they're connected? No, I don't think there's enough evidence, and I think Heather's right. I wouldn't want to connect those two as an affirmative thing. I would say though, it is interesting, Chestnut Ridge and a few other incidents where strange lights have been seen in the sky, but then it's just strange lights being seen, and these are rural locations. UFOs seemingly like rural locations, especially like national forests and places like that.
Mhm.
So it could just be a coincidence that we're putting together and just coming up with a conclusion that isn't really thorough, to be honest with you.
Well, let's get others' opinion on this then, actually, as well, because sticking with the UFO and Bigfoot connection, a lot of these cluster spots, and first of all, I like the idea of actually of if this is a flesh and blood creature, like you said, it's going to be intrigued by things going on around it. I think that's a great point, to be honest. So a lot of these cluster spots are in the same spots where people go disappearing, or disappear, should I say, the missing 411 files and things like that. They're in national parks around mountain regions, things like that. So we've got UFOs, we've got Bigfoot sightings, and we've got people disappearing all within the same rough, space. And usually, sometimes when there's a UFO wave, there's increased Bigfoot sightings, disappearances are happening all the time. We talk about strange lights. You mentioned earlier on about are they using some kind of portal? So are we maybe thinking that some of these locations maybe have some kind of natural portal that allow you know different travel between dimensions or realms, whatever you want to call them? And off the back of that, have you ever come into, during your research of people who have disappeared and then they have reappeared? And there's been a few of these in the newspapers recently as well. And they've made kind of young children have made like illusions saying that a bear helps me get back or a hairy man gets me safe. So again, there's an involvement with Bigfoot with these disappearances. So I know it's two questions in one, but what are your thoughts on those things, are there?
Well, I can think of one particular instance when we were out in New Mexico and we were filming one of our movies that dealt with more like the skinwalker phenomenon, where someone had mentioned that they saw something like a portal in their backyard. Now, their backyard it's the desert, so
Oh,
I don't know
yeah,
how far
yeah.
away the portal was or anything like that, but they had seen a portal and things come in and out of the portal. I've heard the same thing about Skinwalker Ranch,
Mm.
in that there is a portal that kind of has been seen and things appear and disappear. Um, I think that that's possible to exist. I don't know what would happen if a human were to walk into it. I don't know. In the instance in New Mexico, the portal that they were talking about was up. It wouldn't be something that someone could just walk into anyway. It wasn't flat on the ground. It was in the sky that they were seeing things coming in and out. So it wouldn't be something that would be easily accessible for a human. But I've
Mm.
also talked with people who have, they've been lost in the woods and they've had like what you could consider time slips or disorientation in the woods, and they end up much farther away from their car than they should have been because they know how long they've been walking. And whenever they finally come to, so to speak, and are able to reorient themselves, they're 10 miles away instead of 2 miles away from their car, and they know they weren't walking that long. So I don't know what that
Mm.
is exactly. I think when it comes to national parks and missing people, we have so many factors to take into account before we even get to something like portals or Bigfoot or anything like that.
Yeah,
The
yeah.
national parks are massive.
Yeah.
To go off trail alone is a dangerous idea. Um, People do it because it's exciting to go explore. Of course, you want to explore new lands you haven't seen before. I think that's a human instinct in a way.
It
But
is, yes.
we have, animals that will kill you. We have
Oh, yeah.
sharp cliffs that just appear out of nowhere. There are some of these areas that are national parks now at one point were homesteads. There were homes there. So that means that there are wells that may not be covered. You
Right.
could fall into a well. Old places where there were mines, there could be uncovered mine shafts. There's just so many things that could happen. Not to mention, if you fall and you get hurt and you don't have a way to get help, it won't be long before you're in a very horrible situation.
Yeah.
Um, so I think that when it comes to missing people, and that's not even bringing into account that humans are evil, right?
Yeah,
That we
true
have
enough.
Yeah.
stories of other people preying on those who are on like the Appalachian Trail or something
Yeah.
like that. It's sad, but it happens. And the majority of the people that I've talked to that have had any encounters with these odd things, when you ask them about going back out in the woods, once they get over their initial fear of
Mhm.
going back out because they don't want to run into Sasquatch, I can't. Most people will tell you that they're more afraid of running into another human in the woods than they
Yeah.
are Sasquatch.
Yeah.
Um, and I agree with
Yeah, I
that. I
Yeah.
because I
completely
know
get
what
that.
I'm doing out in the woods, but I don't know what you're doing out here. And I don't know if you're armed. I don't know what your intentions are or anything like that. Humans are scarier than monsters, in my opinion. So
Yeah, I
there's
agree.
just a lot of stuff that goes into all of the missing 411 in these areas. But I don't think that portals are necessarily off the list.
Yeah.
I just don't think they're high on the list of why people go missing in these areas.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a fair point. Just ask you one more quick question off the back of that one. You mentioned there about running into another person, and I agree with you completely. I mean, you're completely right with that. Have you ever been out there though, not with another person, not running into a person you don't know, but looking for Sasquatch, looking for Bigfoot, cryptids, and you've really just, for whatever reason, you've felt absolutely terrified and thinking, why on earth have I put myself in this situation and things of that nature?
Um, well, I have been in I can't think of anything where I was like super, super terrified except one instance where, and it was here. It was where I live.
All right.
We have many acres. We were out in the woods, and searching for Bigfoot, so to speak, looking for any type of signs. And I thought that it would be interesting to play what is known as the Ohio Howl through a speaker
Hmm.
because I'm like, maybe that'll elicit response. Well, what ended up happening was upon playing that, um, immediately on the other side of the hollow that we were on, there comes something crashing through the woods towards us. Because I was out there with my husband, towards us, um, very quickly, very heavy, running in our direction. And at that moment, I was like, maybe this wasn't a good idea.
Right. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
what it was ultimately when it ran through, because it crossed our path, it was a deer that upon
Mm.
hearing that howl, it was still interesting that the howl is what kicked it off, like to
Yeah.
get up. I'm also intrigued by the fact that it ran toward the sound instead of away from the sound, but maybe that has to do with the way sound echoes off of the walls of the valley. I don't know, but um, yeah, that was an instance where I was like, yeah, this probably I don't
Yeah, I
really,
can imagine. I can imagine it being a bit unnerving because, if you're
yeah.
going out, people are quite intrepid to go out investigating UFOs or the paranormal and stuff. But be honest with you, I don't know if I can really. I think I think it's more frightening to be in the middle of a forest on your own, with knowing that there's some large creature around. I think that would probably be more scary than going into haunted houses and or looking at UFOs or whatever. I just think because you're in its territory, and we are very limited, aren't we? I mean, we're not built for the forest. We've not got very good eyesight. I'm assuming that they've got a lot better eyesight than us, and be
Mhm.
able to smell and all this sort of thing, sense us. So I think we're out of our comfortable zone when we're out
Yeah.
there at night, and you certainly do feel that presence. I think I mean, your own body will kind of alert you to some degree that something feel. That's usually the first thing. Something feels off. But
Hmm.
it's been some. But what the thing is there's been some really good physical evidence left behind. Now, we look at the physical evidence. We have what? We have prints which have sometimes dermal marking in them, as if like you could see like a, like we have with fingerprints. You get them on feet as
Hmm.
well. and of course his scat and his hair. Now I've looked at some of these samples of hair and analysis that's been done. One of the things that often comes back is that they always say there's some type of human contamination. But I wanted to argue the point is that if they are somehow related to humans, wouldn't we expect to see some form of human DNA in there? Is it always contamination? Because these guys are arguing the point where, well, we never touched it. We had gloves on, and we were we were very specific about that. But all the results always come back. Oh, yeah, there's some human contamination. Unless they're just saying that, but it's a bit frustrating, to be honest with you. But unless it does have some type of human DNA in it, to be honest, it's a bit of a. But physical evidence is left, so something has been there and leaves hair and big
Mhm.
prints and even marks, hand marks and things like that, on sides of buildings and things. So that's very real evidence
Mhm.
that something was there. Now, anybody in the police force would look at that and say, yes, there's an incident here, unfolded, and you can kind of work that out. But until it gets to sort of Sasquatch, Bigfoot type incidents, and it's kind of very diluted for some reason. If they just treat it like a person was was there and did the
Mhm.
investigation, then we'd have some legitimacy on the results. But what do you think, Heather, about that when they're turning around and saying human contamination? Always says to be human contamination.
Well, there's a few different things that come to mind. One is that I see what you're saying as far as if there is a connection to us as a physical creature, then of course there would be some sort of human element to
Yeah,
it.
yeah,
We would think. But I also wonder when it comes to these things. I mean, you hear stories about even stories of bones or bodies being found, and then they get taken, and then all things are erased. So sometimes I wonder if it's not just and I really don't like the idea of government conspiracies, because you can really go off the deep end when it
Oh
comes to
yeah.
that.
Oh
yeah.
yeah.
But I do wonder if it's not sometimes a situation where if there is something that is questionable, that's relayed to someone else, and what's relayed to the layperson or whatever is human contamination, as in just let it go because someone else is going to look into it of a higher grade maybe later. Or maybe it's something that as a whole, things aren't ready to be out there. I think there are implications for if we all of a sudden have proof that Sasquatch exists. One of those would be that clearly, I mean, I would assume it would be an endangered type of species, something
Well,
that
you'd
we would have to
assume that.
protect.
Yeah, straight away. Yeah.
So therefore, places are going to have to be shut down, which then affects massive industry when it comes to timbering, gas lines, natural resources, things like that. I mean, recently I just saw a report about highway construction that was on halt because they found a very rare type of bat. And so the whole like interstate is just on hold for now.
Just because of, yeah,
And
yeah,
I can't imagine what the effect would be to have
yeah.
something like a
You can,
Sasquatch
yeah,
discovered on some of these areas that they inhabit, especially if they do really inhabit as far reaching as it seems to be, because
yeah,
they seem to be everywhere when
Yeah,
you
yeah,
talk to
yeah.
witnesses. And like most recently, we were. Um, Courtney and I did a documentary on the Monroe Monster out of Monroe,
mm,
Michigan, which is not far from Detroit,
Mhm.
talking to people from that area. First of all, Monroe, the most recent sighting that happened in May of this year, it's literally in the middle of a town.
yeah. It's very
Um,
nice. It's very, it's quite small.
it,
It's
it,
a massive place, isn't it?
yeah, it is. I mean, it's along a waterway and there is a wooded area and there are railroad tracks. So, like, it makes sense that there would be animals there, I suppose. But like why would you choose there if there's forests elsewhere to be
Yeah,
and remain hidden? Why would you go into the middle of a town? I don't know. But um when it comes to also the type of report, or not reports, but the evidence that we gather, even if you throw out um the hair samples altogether,
Mhm.
we
yeah,
have such a large body of evidence when it comes to things like footprints alone. that so where do they come from? What like, especially when you talk about the dermal ridges, and I've heard,
Yeah.
I'm not an expert on this by any means, but people talk about the mid-tarsal break being
Yeah.
something that can be picked up on in the casts alone. What is doing that? Because it's not us. So
No.
what is it?
Yeah.
Um, I've heard other people that are former law enforcement. I have two people in my head, so I can't remember which one had
Mm.
said this, but I'm almost positive that it is a friend of mine from Alaska who's former law enforcement and military. But he had argued that he believes, based on witness testimony, the evidence that we do have, that even without a body, if you were to take this to a court and sit
Yeah.
in front of a jury,
Mm.
that you could still convince them that this exists. And if it's good
Yes.
enough for the courts,
It
then
should.
why is it not good enough
Yeah. Yeah.
for most people now?
Yeah.
Because if this were a court case and we have, a mystery to solve, we have more than enough evidence to convince a jury that something
Yeah.
happened or exists or whatever.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
I mean,
Can I, can I just
police
can I just
officers are seeing them, aren't they? I mean, with
oh yeah.
Mm,
these reports
yeah.
from forestry and police officer reports. I've got those reports, and they are seeing. They're no different than people just living in rural areas. They actually claim
Mhm.
to have seen them, and we made reports on them as well. So, there is some in official
Yeah.
capacity that they're recognised. It's only when it comes to the investigation and the authorities of it starts to sort of go a bit weak, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of places in America actually recognise in those signpost trails where the Sasquatch and
Yes.
Bigfoot are. So, can I just
Yeah.
ask you that again? It's something I've never really thought of, Heather. That this could all come down to the fact that, like you say, it's going to affect industries, possibly affect communities. It's going to affect much more than I've never thought about that before. So, I mean, let's assume that you're right for a moment, and I can say it's been blown my mind a bit that, but it's a really good point. Let's assume that you're right, though. How do the authorities deal with this? Because, as you say, people are seeing these things more and more and more. And you would think, as encroachment happens, perhaps on both sides, that there's going to be more and more overlap between us and them. So, how on earth do they handle this? Because there's going to come a point where they're going to either have to hold their hands up and say, "Well, yeah, we've known all along," or they're going to have to take drastic action. And so, I mean, they're putting themselves into a bit of a position, aren't they?
They are, but um thing about I don't know if this is an American thing or just people with great wealth thing, but as far as thinking about into the future, that's not really a consideration on the table. It is
Right.
more about what can make me richer faster now,
Oh,
Right. Okay.
and
yes.
we'll deal with the rest later. So I'm
Mm,
not sure that if that's the case, and it is a concern of we will lose billions of dollars if we have to shut
yeah,
down these industries,
yeah,
I would venture to
yeah,
guess
yeah,
that the people that are having the most payout from this would say, yeah, we'll deal with that when we get to it, but until then, we're not going to worry about it. Because otherwise, they're going to be putting a cap on their profit now, and why would they think beyond right now? That tends to not be where a lot of people in that position are mentally. I'm not saying all of them are like that,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
but a lot of them are.
I mean, you obviously in the area where you live, what's the biggest creature? Is it a bear? Is it a brown bear? What's the largest animal in that vicinity, you know?
So it actually people talk a lot if a black bear gets into the area. It's very
Okay,
rare where I live to see a black bear. It makes the news if someone
right.
sees
It
one.
does if you
So
see a black bear. I mean,
yeah,
how often are people finding the corpses of bears?
they don't. That doesn't happen.
Right, because we know that
Yeah,
the forest consumes them very quickly within, there's
yeah.
been video footage of a deer, for instance, and it's literally within
Mm,
3 days, there's literally nothing
mm.
left. And
Hmm.
it does break down. So, because one of these aspects was, well, surely we must have found one. And I always argue the point, well, even in the UK, I mean, we're a country full of foxes and badgers. I've never seen a badger in my life. Have you seen a badger, Marcus?
Yeah, actually, I have, and they're
You have. You're
surprisingly bloody
lucky.
big. Actually, they're bigger than
Yeah,
you
I
think,
have never.
and aggressive as
Yeah,
well.
they're
Yeah,
all over the UK. They're everywhere. I've
yeah.
never seen one ever.
No,
I've seen them,
I won't
when they
get close to
cross the
one.
road.
I'll tell you that they
No,
are big.
yeah.
Mm.
But do you know what? It can happen. It's not like they're suddenly, oh, what are they doing? We surely would have found one by now. Not necessarily, because we don't
Hmm.
see like like Heather's just said. We don't see many corpses of bears, do we? It's just don't seem to get reported very often. And I do think that the forest can consume them, or they're intelligent enough to sort of. Because you think they've got to be a community for them to survive. I mean, if this goes back hundreds and hundreds of years, if not longer, there's got to be a community. You can't just have
Yeah,
one sole animal walking and living.
right.
No, no.
You've got to have a community of these. That means that there must be females and young uns and stuff like that. So
Hmm.
if you've got a community of them, then that's a considerable amount of food. And
Yeah,
if there isn't that much considerable amount of food in a small area, then you must be thinking, okay, well they got to cover a large area, which is exactly what they're doing, seemingly. But of course, you get a lot of people that say, well, they have a language and they chatter. I don't know. Have you come across that, Heather? Heard about things like that or recorded anything like
Hmm.
that? Yeah.
I have not, the most that I've recorded would be things like a whistle or the
Yeah. Knocks
it
or
sounds like a
anything like
wood
that.
it sounds like a wood knock, but I don't
Yeah.
necessarily think that it's them doing a wood knock. I think it's a
right.
sound that they make with their mouths and hands. But
Yeah.
um that kind of communication. But thankfully, because I'm okay never hearing what they call samurai chatter in person,
Yeah.
because that's just really creepy. But
Right.
I have heard people talk about hearing that. So
Yeah.
yeah, I've definitely heard that they do have ways to
Well,
communicate.
yeah.
It's more of a verbal language like we have.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
The Native Americans said
they
that.
did,
Said
yeah.
that
I
they had a
mean, I'd
language or something.
just like to get Ed's thoughts on this because you mentioned about communities, Steve, and you
Mm.
obviously agree that that must be the case. You were nodding, and we spoke to Jessica Jones. I'm sure you're aware of a few weeks ago, and she was speaking very much the same way that there's evidence of communities. We touched briefly on is it the Otto? I forget the guy's name. The Canadian is it Albert Obsman or something. I forget the name.
Oh, Osman, yeah.
Oh,
He
awesome. Yeah.
said anyway he witnessed a community and a family. Jessica was speaking about even encountering juvenile behaviour from some of these creatures, like running up behind her and essentially trying to scare her. So, have you come across anything like that, or through either yourself or through your research?
Yeah. So, when I first moved to the place that I live now, the farm that I live on now, which is it's a generational farm. It's where my husband grew up. His parents owned it before we did. And anyway, when we first moved here, within a month of being here, we noticed activity happening. This is a 300-acre farm. It's a mix between fields and forests. And it is Minerva area. So we're not far from where the
Yeah.
Minerva monster was. Um, and of course, like you said, very rarely is there just one. So the idea that there's a community. Anyway, so stuff started happening, and it was enough that I had just recently, like within the first 2 years of working with small town monsters, I had said something to Seth, like, I know this is going to sound weird because of what we do, but things are happening at the farm. And he said, well, let me come out with a camera and see what we can catch. And that ultimately became what was called the Bigfoot Project, which you can watch on YouTube. And in that, some of the stuff that happened to us absolutely seemed, and I say juvenile just because it reminds me of something like a teenager, a human teenager would do,
That's what
Yeah.
in
Jessica
that
said. Yeah,
they're testing boundaries. They're getting
exactly
close.
what she said.
We had instances where there's one moment I know that this was on film because I remember having one of the cameras, um the night vision camera, which seemed about useless in this moment, but
Mm.
we would hear one run around us, and as soon as we would turn, then we'd hear one on the other side. So it sounded like as if there were two just like playing with us, like as soon as we turned, then the other one would do something, but it was so quick that it didn't make sense for it to just be one thing running in circles. It was just as soon as it got your attention, then the other thing would. As that's happening, though, my husband was at the cabin, which was a good distance away from where Seth and I were because we had gone into the woods. My husband was at the cabin sitting outside because our children were inside the cabin playing, and it was dark. And he heard things walking up to the cabin.
Mm.
So at first he yelled for us because he thought it was us that we had like circled up around. And when we didn't respond and he realized it wasn't us, then he got concerned because it sounded like I mean, if I were to guess what was happening, we had younger ones that were messing with us. We had walked away from the cabin, uh, and they followed Seth and I to see what was going on and started messing. And then I don't know if that was a juvenile that would have come up to the cabin to investigate or an older one to see what was happening, assuming that the adults or whatever have left. We watched them leave.
Yeah.
Let's go see what these kids are doing. Um, this spring, again, and it's been 3 years that things have been pretty quiet since the Bigfoot project, but this spring, stuff started up again, and I started putting a recorder in the barn, which the you can see the one building behind me. There's a barn
Mm.
just like right
Oh, yes.
there.
Yes. Yeah.
So stuff was happening up in that barn, and I had put a recorder in the barn, and I have on audio something walking into the barn. It sounds like two legs walking in and messing with stuff. And then I had the recorder on the back of the four-wheeler that was in there, and you can hear something just tap its fingers along the four-wheeler, like you can hear it tapping the plastic and then going over and like picking up a piece of metal or wood or shaking it almost like it was trying to figure out, ooh, what does this do? What is this? Which I would assume an adult
Yeah.
wouldn't, first of all, wouldn't walk into someone's barn. But two, an adult would know. But it was getting very close to the house.
Right.
And to me, that's something that a teenager would do. A little more brazen, a little more
Curiosity.
bold.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we had things knocking on the windows. Like it was really close. And
Oh, so it was an actual knock on the
yeah,
window.
there my kids came my kids came flying into the room, into the back office where my husband and I were. My two youngest came flying in, freaking out because something had knocked on the window.
Right.
And it was dark when this had happened, but it was just a on the window, on the glass. And they came running in, and we flipped the light on. We went outside. We didn't see anything. And then, tried to assure them that it was nothing. Just,
Mm.
it's fine. No
Have you
worries. It
have
was the
you have you
wind or
placed
whatever.
have you placed things out there, Heather, that which sort of get moved or taken or things like?
So I didn't put anything close to the house
Mm.
for that because I don't want anything close to the house.
Yes.
That
Mm.
was making me very unnerved. When we did the Bigfoot project, the activity wasn't happening here at the house. It was happening on the other side of the property where there's a hunting cabin.
Mm.
And I did put things out there. That stuff has been moved
Oh, has it?
on and off. Um, and that's something that even, let's see, we had Les Odell came up a few months back,
Mm.
and we had things had been moved out in that area. So stuff has been moved within the last year there, but I didn't want to tempt anything to get closer to the house.
Yeah.
Um, I probably maybe would feel different if I didn't have children. Um,
Oh, yeah, yeah. I can
but
completely understand that. Yeah.
yeah, since they're still pretty young, I'm like, yeah, I'd rather you guys just
Mm.
not.
Do you have
The odd
do you have dogs? Do you have dogs?
No.
Anything like that? Oh, you don't
Mm-mm.
have dogs, right? Because I hear a lot of people
No.
that do have dogs and they're alerted to some
Yeah.
things. Yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
I
Yeah.
believe there would be. Can I ask you one question? You mentioned we talked about connections. Have you yourself, because you said people who would witness Bigfoot, they also start experiencing bizarre, activity at the same time. Have you yourself noticed that either on your property or again just through your research, through cases you've investigated? More like poltergeist activity, things of that nature, specifically.
Um, so when it comes to things here specifically that we
Hmm.
have encountered, there's absolutely been something almost poltergeist like. We literally refer to it as the Trickster because of the things that it's done.
Right.
Yes.
And things such as like it's happened to all of us where we've heard someone else in the house yell for us
Right.
when no one else is home. The kids will come downstairs from their rooms and ask us what we wanted, and we're like, "What are you talking about?" And they're like, "We just heard you yell for me," and I didn't yell for you. I wasn't even in that side of the house, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Um, so things like that have happened. There's been, I mean, it was worse when we first moved in, and I don't know if I've just grown to ignore it or it's lessened. I'm not sure, but
Mm.
like shadow type figures and things like that was all
Mm.
occurring. I don't know. I mean, we even had an instance where, like, where I'm sitting right now, um, at night, a friend had come in. She was living in Oregon at the time, and it was one of her first times in Ohio, and she was staying here with us. We had just moved in, and um, we had had some odd things happen in the woods. We came back to the house, and like, well, weird stuff happens at the house. Let's do like a ghost hunt type
Yeah.
thing at the house. And it was really nice. So we sat out here on the back porch, and I was sitting as I were with you, or I am with you guys, where I'm facing toward the house, but everybody else is facing the other way. And I had the headphones on and my eyes closed and all of that, with the spirit box going for the Estes method.
Mm.
And they started asking various questions. And I guess at one point, they turned a flashlight on to shine because they heard something over here in the pine trees. And
Mm.
I apparently, when they did that, then I said, too bright, turn it off. Um, but I was answering things that they were asking as if there was a spirit or something. They were hearing something.
Mm.
And this is where the paranormal gets really weird too, in that it
Mm.
creates like a physical type response. You're hearing something, but they didn't see anything.
Yeah.
Um, but I was responding as if that we're communicating to them. So I don't know. We have had really weird things happen. And it's something that, like, this house as well, my mother-in-law has told me when she was younger and when she first moved into this house, the things that she had experienced were very similar. So this has been an ongoing thing. And it makes me wonder if there's something with the land in general.
Mm.
Um,
Mm.
and I don't know all of the history of the area. I know that we are not far from what's called the Great Trail, which was like a migration hunting trail for Native
Yeah.
Americans.
Yeah.
Um, we're within a few miles of there. I don't know if that would indicate anything. I have no idea. But it makes me think that because it's been going on for so long, that there is something here. And I don't know if that's necessarily Bigfoot related, or if we're again working. This is also why I think the trickster element
Yeah.
comes
Yeah.
into play, because of, I think that we might be dealing with those two things, because we've
Hmm.
had weird stuff happen. And if there is a trickster type thing here, it's seeing these other creatures in the woods or whatever. I
Yeah.
do think that there was something physical here, because I have it on audio touching stuff.
Yes.
I
Yeah.
have it on audio whistling and clapping. And um, even after the first time that I had put something up in the barn, the path leading to the barn the next day when I went up, the path had huge pine branches across the path. And
Oh, right. I
like,
see.
I
Yeah.
was like, okay, well, something physically did that.
Yeah.
I don't know. Um, but
Yeah.
yeah, so no, weird stuff has happened. I think, and I think that, I don't know, people that have had these experiences, a lot of times when I talk to witnesses, they'll say, they kind of ease you into what their experience is. They'll tell you the things that seem more believable at
Yeah.
first to see your reaction.
Yeah.
And then when they realize that they're not being judged and things are kind of free, then they're like, okay, well, these other things happen, but it's going to sound crazy.
Yeah.
And it turns
So,
out that when
Weird
one
stuff.
weird thing happens, a lot of weird stuff happens
yeah.
a lot of the
Yeah,
time.
yeah. What are your thoughts, Eddie? You mentioned that it's been going on in that property for generations, and we know that there's other places, exactly like this, whether it's ranches, farms, just areas in general. Um, do you think that the land has got something to do with it, whether it's the electromagnetic energy, the geology of the land, and do you feel that somehow this release of energy or combination of energies is responsible for all of this stuff in a sense that it's allowing whatever Bigfoot is, whatever UFOs might be, whatever tulpas might be, whatever all of these things are, it's
High
allowing them
strangeness.
to
Yeah.
manifest within
Mm.
these perimeters, and it's similar to
Mhm.
Skinwalker Ranch, similar to Blind Frog Ranch. What are your thoughts on those theories?
Yeah, well, I'm not a scientist, so
No,
I
that's
can't
fair enough.
say for certain how these different elements work together, but I can say that it does make sense to me, um, that different minerals and such interacting together could be a conduit for things. Because I do think there's something to I'm not saying that it's 100%, but I think there's something to, when you walk into a metaphysical store and they have the various crystals and stones broken down by their properties, that there's
Yeah.
something to how they even reach that conclusion. I think it's more than just someone sitting there going, all right, we're gonna make this onyx.
Oh
We're just
yeah.
gonna say it
Yeah.
repels evil. It makes sense,
Yeah.
and then that
Yeah.
just takes off from there. I think there's something to the interaction of these types of minerals that can create something, whether it be magnified. I mean, we use minerals in some of our technologies. So like
Yeah.
they have some sort of power to them when they're mixed together. I don't know what all of that is.
Mm.
Um, I have heard interesting theories that um I forget what the stone was, but it was something that they posited the idea in the Hellier series.
Yeah.
Um, that the one place in Kentucky
Oh,
was
I
on
remember
top of
that.
a particular
That's
type
right.
of stone,
Yeah.
and therefore that attracted all this weird stuff and negative energy and all this. Um, and I
Yeah.
don't know. I mean, maybe there is something to that. And maybe, maybe it's something we would be more attuned to if we weren't so modernized in this
True,
moment.
yeah.
Yeah.
But we've become removed from the land. So,
I think what's interesting is that when you talk to anybody initially, if they're talking about, well, we have some type of cryptid stuff going on, usually, eventually they start to sort of say, oh yeah, we have like paranormal things happen as well. And I think to myself, well, why? If it's just a creature coming around, at night,
mhm,
you wouldn't expect that, or like a prowling coyote or anything like that. You wouldn't expect paranormal things. So there is seemingly something that goes hand in hand with this. The more that stuff happens, it takes you away from the fact that it's just a creature just coming around at night. That's what's
mhm,
so profound about this, is that some aspects of it just don't fit into normal physics and things, normality. But it is the
yeah,
same for the UFO phenomena, and it's the same. People who see UFOs, would often talk about, oh yeah, we saw this UFO, and some of these people lived on farms, and it goes all the way back to Project Blue Book, where the Blue Book officers would go out and they talk to, say, an example, Mrs. Brown. And Mrs. Brown said, "Oh yeah, we saw this UFO. It followed us home to the farm, and it was hung in the sky about half an hour." But eventually, Mrs. Brown turns around and said, "Oh, and by the way, after that, a couple of weeks we had poltergeist stuff happen."
right.
Blue Book didn't want to put in that paranormal stuff. They just stick to the UFO stuff. So I think
Mhm,
there's been a close connection with a lot of these things for a long period of time, and it's been compartmentalized. So this is why
mhm,
you've got the Bigfoot guys and the paranormal guys and UFO guys. Many of them don't work together, of course. But I have
mhm,
recently started looking into the paranormal Bigfoot, where there was a documentary on that and stuff. And they had a couple of witnesses that said they saw a Bigfoot that seemed to descend into a ball of light and shoot off at high speed, and just strange things like this. Sometimes there's people who claim that they've seen something or captured something which seems to be cloaked. And it sounds ridiculous, but it's a bit like a predator film. It's like you'd
mhm.
only see it if it moves. It's like bending light around it. But I've seen a few videos of that, and I can clearly see, yes, there's something there. I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's somebody doing our tech out there and just doing stuff, or it is something which is like the camellia can sort of blend her into its surroundings. There's so many possibilities, isn't there, really, when it comes to what these creatures represent, to be honest. And of course,
Mhm.
conversations. I mean, it was on one of the documentaries from 411. I think it was one of the, was it the UFO connection? I can't remember, but he was interviewing people who captured out there at night and literally captured conversations and very intelligent chatter. And it's almost human, but it's not, But we're trying to think, what is this in the middle of the night in a rural location? And apparently they hid inside a tree, a very large tree, and just recorded there, But there are people that are having these things happen all over
Mhm.
the world. It's not just. So when you talk about Dogman, I mean, I thought Dogman was just a European thing. It's
Oh
not.
no.
I mean, it's very much,
Yeah.
Ohio. I mean, I've recently talked to people in Ohio. It's in Australia. Dogman's in
Hmm.
Australia. There's numerous. There's Dogman sculptures on the side of 2,000-year-old temples in India. And what the hell is a
Hmm.
Dogman doing on the side of it? And it's a Dogman. And you think to yourself, there's something gone on here and still kind of going on. Around the world, it's kind of a bit of a global thing, really. But and it's been going on for a very long time. But the incidents still continue though regularly, don't they? Did he still gain as much press interest? Did the press still publicize stuff?
For Dogman?
Yeah, or Bigfoot, really. Did he put it into the newspapers?
I mean, yeah, so uh, early newspaper accounts from the early late 1800s, early 1900s, they didn't have a word for Bigfoot. It was like wild man or whatever. So
Mm,
the press has found, and of course you can go into what would sell newspapers, right? So it was a sensationalized headline. It would catch people's attention. They're selling a newspaper. That stuff has continued. Patterson Gimlin came out. We have
yeah.
Bigfoot as a name, Sasquatch as a name, as we get into people studying out of British Columbia and relaying those terms to us. And I think that it's always had our attention to a certain degree, but then it really takes off. Of course, with Bigfoot, it's finding Bigfoot. I don't think there's a way to
Mm,
deny that. When that
no.
became a series, that exploded the cryptid community and people coming forward with their stories. And people may argue that, that wasn't a good thing, but I would say the opposite because it has allowed people to be emboldened to come forward with their stories that they've
Mm,
otherwise kept to themselves for sometimes decades.
Yeah.
Um, but yes, it gets attention now. I think if anything, what's happening now is that it's become more accepted when someone comes forward with these stories. It's there's not that there isn't stigma to it because there is.
Mhm.
Um, but I think you're more likely to get like-minded people or people to be in support of you if you come forward now than you would have 30 years ago.
mm,
Um, when it comes to Dogman, it seems like, at least from my perspective, um, helping with these documentaries, when you go in popularity of cryptids that people talk about, obviously Bigfoot dominates everything. Dogman is coming in strong behind it. It's not nearly as popular as Bigfoot, but it's getting
it's
up
there,
there. I
yeah.
would say it's
Mm,
number two. And but it's still on that cusp of being weird enough
mm,
that I think people are still hesitant to come forward with those stories. It gets reported on, but the backlash that people give is stronger as far as and I'm talking specifically online, what
mm,
the
Yeah.
yeah.
community say, whether it's in YouTube comments or comments on articles or whatnot. Journalists can possibly give the story completely unbiased or as unbiased as possible, but then the comments will rip them to shreds. We see it on YouTube all the time, even with Bigfoot stuff, really. If
Yeah.
Mm.
if you look a certain way or you say a certain phrase, they will rip you apart because people are mean,
Yeah. Yeah.
especially on YouTube. The trolls are nasty, but um, it does get reported on, and I think that the more things get reported on, the more that it will be accepted, the more that it will be okay, and maybe the more that that opens it up to us talking about even the weirder stuff. Because once Bigfoot gets accepted as, yeah, that exists, that's not a big
Yeah, yeah.
deal
Yeah,
kind of
yeah.
thing, then we can talk more about these other oddities. And
Yeah.
once those get accepted, then you can get into the even weirder things like, okay,
Yeah.
well, if Bigfoot exists, maybe Dogman exists. Well, okay, we've collectively decided that Dogman probably exists. So now what else can exist?
Yeah.
Because every time that something like this is discovered or experienced by a person, and I've talked with many witnesses and asked them how, how does your paradigm shift upon having
Mm.
these events? And it's always the same thing. It
Yeah.
opens your world up
Yeah.
because if this can exist, then what
What
else can
else?
exist?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I mean,
Heather, can I just ask you
sorry.
about the dogmen? Sorry, Steve. Can I just ask you about the dogmen? Do you feel they are increasing? Because I know in the United Kingdom, as silly as it sounds,
Mm.
particularly in Yorkshire, where well, certainly where I'm from in England, there's been a few sightings over the last 10 years. There was a spate of them about 3 or 4 years ago. There's a couple of interesting things here as well. Yorkshire was the last place in England where wolves roamed free, for example, before they went extinct. So it's interesting that
Hmm.
Mm.
that same location is now having sightings of so-called dogmen. Off the back of those, I occasionally put like posts out on social media, say, "Oh, anyone's seen this? Let me know." A few people come back to me, and one person said that they literally saw this figure. They described it as like a dogman, like you would expect, and they said it suddenly went down to all fours and physically changed, not to a dog or anything, but physically changed in order to run on all fours. And they were deadly serious. I mean, I knew them as well, so
Mm.
I can vouch for them, I think. Um, do you feel that they are increasing? And what is the reason? Is it just that people are more eager to come forward or feel safer to come forward? Or are these creatures getting more bolder?
That's a really good question. I think that we have a mix of things. If I were to just take a crack at that question
Mm.
Yeah,
immediately.
yeah,
One, people have had experiences and they're more willing to come forward as other people come forward. I think that goes with anything
yeah,
that people have experienced, whether it's paranormal or regular stuff. More people are willing to come forward as others step forward with their experiences. But also, it makes me wonder, based on our earlier conversations, that if we are dealing with something that is like a trickster type element, as more things get brought into the fold, why would it not also
mimic that.
inhabit these things as well and mimic those things, especially with something like Dogman, because Dogman is one of those that I can't think of a single person that felt better after having that experience.
No, no.
If the goal is to put fear into humans,
Mm.
Dogman is a good way to go
Yeah,
with that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, and you would think on surface level, running into a 9 foot tall ape in the woods that could literally rip you to shreds,
yeah, yeah.
Mm.
should be enough to scare you off. And maybe it does in the moment, but later people come back and they're like, I want to see it again. I want to figure out what that is. But the people that have seen the Dogman, I mean, people do go out looking for it, but they don't really want to see it. They don't
Yeah.
really want to encounter it again if they've seen it once. I mean, they might want an answer to what it is, but it wasn't a good time. It wasn't like
Mm.
I felt better or enlightened or protected or anything like that. It's bad. It's
Mm.
when that's the one that when people describe it, I've heard the term evil used more often than
Yeah.
not.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I wonder if we go the route of something supernatural being a possibility and you have something like a trickster, whatever their goal is, I would assume on the limited knowledge that I have of tricksters throughout mythology and stuff, their goal is simply to cause chaos.
Mm.
Like they don't
Mm.
really necessarily, it's not that they're evil
Mm.
or
Mm.
malicious, so to speak. It's just, it's entertainment, it's fun, it's whatever. And what a better way to get people riled up than to put a eight
Yeah.
foot dog in front of
It
them that could
It's
works.
rip
like
them
literally,
apart, you
it
know?
literally mimics the jinn, doesn't it? Speaking of
Yeah.
mythology and stuff, it mimics exactly how the jinn would act. Like you said, a trickster, and it can shapeshift and
Hmm.
it likes chaos. So again, it's interesting these similarities. And Steve, I'm sure you feel the same.
There are definitely similarities, but they vary all across the world for various different things and different names. But there are many, many, many different types of cryptids. I mean, how would we even begin to start with the Mothman, for an example?
Right.
We had the reports of the Owlman in the UK, of course, but but they are equally interesting. And those red glowing eyes again, and
Hmm.
those seems to pop up from time to time, and all sorts of different things from all over the world. And you think to yourself, well, there's just too many incidents. But it's
Yeah.
just, I always like to look at the authorities and do authorities sort of take it seriously where you are, Heather? Do people even bother reporting in, or did it just keep it quiet and don't contact the police unless there's something really significant that's happening?
So, of the people that I have talked to that have actually gone and contacted police, or are police themselves that have had experiences, usually when it comes to something like Bigfoot, um, there are places where they're almost used to having those kind of reports. It just is, yeah, people call that in. It's not a surprise, and it just kind of is part of what they come to expect. Um, and then
Yeah.
there are others that are like, well, clearly they were on something if they saw this particular
Mm.
creature. A lot of times they say, I have heard a lot of people say, well, that clearly they were drunk, but I've been
No.
drunk and never seen a Bigfoot. So
Yeah.
that's not where you don't necessarily hallucinate when you're drunk, but
Mm.
that's often what they say to discredit people. When it comes to
Yeah.
something like Dogman, the people that I have talked to that went to talk to authorities, whether that was a police officer or a park ranger or whatever, they are dismissed outright. It is no, that was a bear. It's always a bear. That was a
Always a
bear
bear.
that you saw. It's nothing to be taken seriously. Yeah, it's not. And they just leave it at that and they won't listen to anything else. Now, whether they believe you or not, I think is probably a different question altogether. It's what they're willing to admit in the moment. And I think when it comes to something like Dogman, maybe that's part of the thing is that it's not as widely accepted at the moment. It is more of a conundrum. It doesn't make sense physically. It's easier for us to digest the idea of a Sasquatch because we have humans and apes.
Right.
Yeah.
So, sure. And we have bones of Gigantopithecus,
Yeah,
right? So we know at one
gigantic.
point we had large apes wandering across the
Mm.
world. So that makes sense to our minds. But a upright canid does not make
No,
sense.
it really
And
doesn't.
throughout all of our history, when we talked about upright canids, they were werewolves, and that was
Yeah.
never a good thing. Like they were
No.
always bad. So
Yeah.
I just think I don't know. When they're reported, I don't think that the Dogman stuff is taken as seriously anymore, or not anymore. I don't think it was ever taken as seriously as something like Bigfoot. And I don't think Bigfoot necessarily was taken overly seriously until fairly recently either.
Yeah.
And I also think it's dependent upon it depends on where you are. It depends on who's reporting it as well. Because like you said, you had your friend or someone that you knew that you could vouch for them. You
Yeah.
know them.
Yeah.
But if you have a complete stranger coming up to you or someone who maybe has a checkered past and they come up and say that they had this experience, then doubt is already cast upon what they've been saying. So,
Yes.
um, I
Yeah,
think
that's
there's
a
a
bit
lot of
different.
elements to it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Heather, I mean, we're going to have to let you go in a little bit, but I want to get your thoughts on one more thing, really. And it goes back to a little bit of the supernatural element, but also the spiritual element, really. I mean, for example, I know a guy who he likes to go out like you guys. He likes to go out into the woods, he likes to search for Bigfoot. And he was contacted by a gentleman who was out there. He was out in Lincolnshire, which is near Yorkshire where I am, and he was looking for Bigfoot because he'd heard reports. He thought he saw or heard something, and then the next thing he knew, he was just staring at a tree, and hours and hours had passed. He reported it to my friend who investigates these things, and he was talking about it was very likely that he did encounter a Bigfoot, and he was put in some kind of trance, essentially, so this Bigfoot could get away. Now, I don't know if you've experienced anything like that, but also
Yeah.
in Ben Macdoo in Scotland, there are similar encounters of like big, hairy men who seemingly
Mhm.
guide people down the mountains who are lost. And then once they're
Yeah.
there, they forget they've had the experience. They know they've had something.
Mm.
Hmm.
So, what are your
Yeah.
thoughts on that? Is there this a spiritual almost a creature that's more in tune with its intellectual or mental abilities?
Yeah. I mean, I can't rule that out because I don't know what these things are. I've definitely heard those experiences before where, and one of them was fairly recently. It was within the last year. We were interviewing a woman named Sonia here in Ohio who explained her encounter with a Sasquatch. She knows what she saw, but when she was having the sighting, because she was against like a cliff face and they were kind of shuffling along and she's looking up and as she describes it, now she saw one, I'm guessing a juvenile, peering over, looking at her. So she saw the face, she saw it very clearly. And when she was having this moment, she was with other people and she was trying to tell them, look. But what was coming out of her mouth was the tree stump, the tree stump.
Right.
That's what was going in her head. Like that's what was coming out, but she
Yeah.
knew she wasn't seeing a tree stump.
Mm.
That's just how it manifested in her mind. And you know, it makes me wonder if that's not a situation where it could
Yeah.
be something like they are in tune with other things and are able to make you like project things into your mind. Like you're going to see a tree,
Yeah.
you're going to see whatever. It's not, I'm not the one you're looking for kind of thing. Like
Yeah.
it's not
Yeah.
me.
Yes, exactly.
Um, but
Yeah.
also I wonder if it's not a mix of also what our brain does to protect ourselves
It
and that
could
we
be.
recall certain memories
Yeah.
incorrectly to protect our brains from melting down.
Yes.
And it happens a lot with trauma survivors where
Mm.
they don't remember things in the way that it happened. Oftentimes, there may be some fantastical element to something that was absolutely horrible just because that's what their brain allowed them
Yeah.
to remember so that they could function. So I wonder if that's not a mix of it as well, as you saw something so traumatic that your brain was like, it was a tree.
Mm.
You
Well, yeah.
saw
Yeah.
you saw a tree, that's it, because nothing else makes sense to your brain. I don't know.
No, it really doesn't. We're still in our infancy, really, in regarding researching the Dogman and Bigfoot type of experiences. I mean, from all over the world, from the early days of Yetis and abominable
Mhm.
snowman prints and things like that. But one thing it does stand out though is about this fear factor and there was some hypothesis that why did he do what they do? Because they're not acting, they've got to be a predator for a start, but they don't act like predators because there've been incidents when they've given chase. People have fallen over and literally this thing's above them. And the people that have fallen over are absolutely so frightened that they've curled up into a little ball in a fetal position. It's just that absolute, if I don't move, maybe it won't get me. It's that survivor sense. And things
Hmm.
over the top of them are big claws and it's huge. That is a dinner ticket there. I mean, it's a meal ticket, isn't it, really? And any predator on the planet, once it's done its pursuit, if you're there, that's it. But no, it was
Hmm.
like kind of looks around and says, "Well, the game's up," and it just kind of runs off. There are many reports of that. Like it seems to be the rise of fear, and is it because it's fear pheromones and stuff like that? And I got into a conversation with some scientists. Some of them said, "Well, no, we don't produce them anymore. We can't detect them." But then there has been studies where skydivers went out skydiving for the day. They wear these patches. For the first time they went skydiving, these patches were then taken to the lab. And then also some just people running in a park, jogging. And that was taken to the lab. And it was clearly identified by people which could smell fear. Literally,
Hmm.
from the skydivers, they could identify the difference. So maybe there is some fear pheromones there. And I don't know what is it for. It's a lot of effort they put into it just to gain fear, isn't it, really? Now, that sounds something dark, doesn't it? When you talk about things like, yeah, if something's just doing it just to cause fear, that's its ultimation. So therefore, it's something quite dark, as opposed from Bigfoot. Bigfoot seems to be a bit different. So, but like I say, cryptids are cryptids, and they are strange. They both act completely
Mm.
different. But equally,
Hmm.
though, there are lots of cases. There was only one I was looking at last week where a couple had been plagued by these things, and apparently this dog man had been literally putting its paw prints on the car, these massive big paw prints on the car. But when they had the car, they couldn't get the mark out of the car. So they had a professional come out and say, "Look, how do we get it out?" He says, "It's weird. It's as if it's bonded with the paint. It's the only way for me to get that mark out is to literally take the paint off and respray that
Hmm.
area. It's literally like bonded with the." And I'm thinking that is so weird, so strange.
Mm.
So you know what? There's nothing really. We are finding new things out. We kind of go, "Okay, that's really strange. Not heard of that before."
It's
But
kind of
one
what
thing
Yeah.
keeps it
one thing is that
interesting,
we
isn't it?
don't we
Really?
don't like the ETs and things like that. We don't tend to get that interest with the children with Dogman. It's just the first thing that tends to come over is fear. Sometimes before they've
Mhm.
even seen anything. And what's interesting, even with Bigfoot in some cases, the people that live in their own backyard suddenly are confused as to where am I? I don't recognize where I am. This confusion setting, and that's
Mhm.
a bit strange as well, isn't it? I suppose.
It's all strange. That's what keeps us all interested, I think. Look,
Yeah,
Heather, I need to thank you. We need to wrap this up. It's been absolutely
yeah, I
fantastic
enjoyed
speaking
it.
to you tonight. And I legitimately, genuinely mean this. There's been 2 or 3 points tonight where what you've said has really made me think. It made me think, I've not thought of it like that before. So I
About the
love
land
that.
and that, yeah.
So thank you. So before we let you go, though,
Awesome.
what's going on in Heather Moses' world? What you got coming up? Have you got any more books, presentations, talks? Floor's yours, Heather.
Well, the talks are done for this year, but Courtney Breedlove and I are going to be the MCs of the Ohio Bigfoot Conference in May.
Okay.
So that's exciting and nerve-wracking at the same time. But that's the next big thing as far as individually kind of what I would be doing. But for Small Town Monsters, especially in October, it is unreal the amount of stuff that we have coming out. Some of it because of our own choice, and others through distributors' choices. But it is, or it is what it is.
Yeah.
So we have Lost Contact coming out. Goatman will be coming out. We have our next book from STM Publishing, Heart of Ice, Tracking the Wendigo. There's a
Oh, the
Wendigo special
Wendigo.
coming out at the end of the month
Yeah.
around
So
Halloween.
Wow.
Yeah. But in Cursed Waters is finally coming out, which is an Ogopogo film. Um, and all of this is happening in October. So we've got that coming out. Ape Canyon should be out within the next month or two. Siege of Ape Canyon. And it's
Wow.
constant
Yeah,
stuff being released.
there's a lot.
Watch our YouTube. I think one thing we've noticed is that we have almost two audiences. We have a YouTube audience
right.
that's aware of our YouTube content, and then we have the ones who are aware of our documentaries, and they don't necessarily cross over. But we
Ah,
make
right.
documentaries and movies that you can stream on Amazon or Tubi, things like that. We also make content on YouTube, and we have on average 1 to 2 new episodes every week.
Nice.
So
Perfect.
yeah,
Excellent. Brilliant.
Absolutely
Have you
perfect.
have you have you sent any of these, reports and things over to Unsolved Mysteries? Because
no.
they do cover. You should do. I've done quite a bit of work for. I've done some work for Unsolved Mysteries. You know what? If he's just they were always looking for this type of material. I've only been on the phone to him last couple of weeks. So they're
Yeah.
always looking for this type of material. Creepy but some good facts and stuff like that.
Yeah.
You should do. You should reach out to them, send stuff to them. You really should.
Yeah, we actually had one of the because I try to keep in touch with all the witnesses that we've interviewed over the years, and one of the first projects that I was involved with was on the trail of Lake Michigan Mothman, and there was a witness from there that I talked to pretty frequently, and she was contacted by Unsolved Mysteries
Well,
about a
they
year
does.
and a
Yeah,
half ago at
they
this
did a
point,
Mothman. They did one in
and
season 5. Yeah.
she wanted my input on whether, like how that
Mm.
should go. And I said, well, my only advice, one, it's unsolved mysteries, so right away I'm like, it's probably fine. But
Yeah.
two, I said my biggest thing for you would be to say, talk to the producers, go with your gut instinct, and
Mhm.
make sure that you don't sign away your story, because that's something that
No, no.
unfortunately
Yeah.
does happen
Yeah.
Yes.
in the
Yeah. You,
field, and that's extremely frustrating. But I'm like, just keep your wits about you. As long as it still remains your story and you feel good about what they're doing, then go for it. And she was interviewed for the
I know
Lake
they did a
Michigan
Mothman
Mothman
one
stuff.
because
So yeah.
I talked to the
Excellent.
producer who did it.
Excellent.
So and I was
Hmm.
thinking, so you got enough material to make it? He said, oh yeah, yeah. He said, yeah, we have plenty. Oh right, okay, good.
That's absolutely brilliant. Heather, thank you so much for joining us. Thanks for taking the time to join us. It's been absolutely fantastic speaking with you.
Yeah, I really
So
enjoyed
thank
it.
you.
Thanks, Heather.
Yeah, it's
Thank you.
absolutely been
Thank you.
great. No problem. And thank you
Well,
guys for joining us. Make sure you check out Heather's work. Make sure you check out our work. Make sure you subscribe to our channel. Make sure you check us out on social media. And obviously, check out the Anomaly Project podcast.com website for articles, news, and information. Until next time, goodbye and take care.